Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, the F&I Agent's Roadmap, Mastering the Cold In-Store Visit. I'm Kate Spadafora, your moderator, and I'm thrilled to have you all here. To guide us, we have a fantastic expert with us, Allstate Dealer Services, Peter Chafetz, an experienced training and development specialist. Peter, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Kate. It's always a fun time to talk with you. I'm really excited today to talk about a framework that's designed to help agents feel more confident and better prepared for what can often be an intimidating situation.
So today we're going to demystify the cold call and give you a structured conversational approach to turn those quick stops into valuable business conversations.
Yep, that's exactly right. One thing, it's important to note that the goal of the cold call isn't to sell your products or services on the spot, but rather to quickly establish rapport with the prospect and uncover just enough pain to justify a future, more substantial meeting. If you use this approach, it turns a potential vendor pitch into a much more valuable business-centered conversation.
So a lot of F&I agents struggle with that initial conversation with their dealers. So let's dive into a strategy that will help set you up for success.
Yes, so today what we're going to do is we're going to walk through a 7-phase sales questioning model that's designed to help you drive those meaningful prospect conversations, give you the ability to approach each interaction with confidence, and essentially be better prepared for success. The interesting thing about this particular process, the format is neuroscience-based, and it leverages quite a bit of the research that was done in the area of NLP, or neuro-linguistic programming. With neuro-linguistic programming, it's all about sequence and timing, as well as about saying and doing things that are going to lower the natural amount of resistance that's in your prospect's mind. Simply put, the good questions create curiosity, whereas statements tend to invite resistance. So what we're about to see are a bunch of sample questions for each phase of this process. Now, it's important to remember that these are just suggested questions. So 2 things to keep in mind as you're listening to this presentation. The first one is, if you like a particular phrase, own them and use them consistently. And second, if you see several sample questions, just remember that you're only likely to use one to initiate each phase of the process, not going through all of them, as I'll explain during this session. So let's walk through what you see on the screen now, which is a roadmap at a very high level. As you can see, there are 7 phases in the roadmap, and they range from building rapport and credibility to identifying needs and problems, to guiding the dealer to explore solutions, and then ultimately securing the future meeting. Again, it's not about trying to sell your products and services now, but just trigger enough interest for the next meeting. The key steps include the connection phase, which is essentially about beginning to build rapport and establishing you as a potentially credible resource. The next phase is the engagement phase. The engagement phase is where you're going to be gathering information about the dealer's current operations and to identify needs and problems. And as you can see, there are 5 steps in that engagement phase, and we'll be going into each one of those in detail. Once you've gotten through the engagement phase, then it's just a matter of going through the transition phase, which is where you bridge the gap or connect the dots between the pain points that you identified during the engagement phase and then securing the next meeting. That leads to the presentation phase, and this is where you're going to emphasize the meeting the value of the meeting and not the products or services. So you're presenting the meeting as the next logical step. That's followed by the commitment phase. Here, you're going to test the level of interest and essentially guide the dealer towards exploring your solutions. And then the last phase is the objection phase, and that's being prepared for the inevitable objections that you're likely to get or may get from the prospect. And here you're going to use the identified pain points to gain agreement and move past those objections. And then the final step is just the logistics phase, which is finalizing the meeting details so there's no confusion as to what's going to happen next.
This all sounds great, Peter. Really looking forward to learning more. So like you just stated, our first phase is the connecting stage. How do we quickly earn a dealer's attention and differentiate ourselves from all the other vendors who just drop off a card?
Well, you never get a second chance to make a first impression, so making a connection with the prospect is probably the most important part of this visit. You want to get off on the right foot. You want to be direct, and you want to be respectful of their time. It's important to remember that at this point, you're an interruption in their day if you didn't have an appointment. So if you've been an agent for any length of time, this step should be pretty straightforward. To get started, just take a deep breath, smile, and start to build some kind of connection with the customer. A good way to do this could be acknowledging their busy schedule and then immediately stating your purpose. Empathy is something that you should keep in mind as you're going through this. If you've ever been a dealer or a general manager, or if somebody approached you to initiate a sales conversation that you weren't expecting, what would you want from that individual? And most people would answer that question. They want the person to be direct, they want the person to be transparent, and they want that person to be respectful of their time. So, for example, you could say something like, "Hello, my name's Peter Chafetz. I'm with Allstate Dealer Services. I can see that you're busy, so I'll be brief. I'm just stopping by in a few dealerships in this area just to have with a quick question about your F&I department. Is now an okay time for just a quick chat?" Something simple like that can get the process started, and this sets a clear framework and actually gives them an easy out because it was a closed-end question. But that's okay. We can address the no's a little bit later. Another tactic is to lead with a question that shows you're curious and not just selling. So, for example, you could say something like, "I'm not sure if what we do would be a good fit for you, but I'm just a little bit curious. What's the biggest challenge you've seen in the F&I office lately?" This type of question immediately shifts the conversation to the prospect, and then giving them the opportunity to talk about what is likely to be their favorite person, which is themselves. Other talking points may be something like, "I can see you're pretty busy today. It's great to see that metal is moving. With the market the way it is, what's been the biggest priority in your dealership this quarter?" Again, questions to provoke conversation. Or, "I've been in the industry for a while, and I'm always curious to see what's working for other dealers. What's one thing that you're particularly proud of about your F&I department's performance?" Give that customer or give that prospect an opportunity to brag about what's going on in their store. And finally, another option could be, "I'm sure you get a lot of people like me stopping by. So just to be clear, are you open to hearing about some different approaches to F&I, or is that not a priority for you right now?" And again, they may say, "No, it's not a priority." That's okay. It's part of the strategy.
I like that. So it's about being a problem solver from the very beginning, which leads us perfectly into the next and most critical phase for securing an appointment, the engagement stage. The engagement stage is where you uncover their needs and problems. This is where the real digging happens, right?
100%. This is where the magic happens. And I mentioned earlier the concept of sequence and timing. When you understand and master these steps, you can essentially hack the matrix And what I mean by that is being able to connect with the prospect in a much more meaningful way and position yourself for more opportunities for the future meetings, which again is the goal that you're looking for. So the engagement phase breaks down into 5 steps. The first step would be the situational questions. And here, these are questions designed to gather basic facts. They're all about gathering basic facts to build context. You're not looking for pain here. You're just looking for information to get the process started. So you went through your initial meeting, you're asking some questions to the dealer, and you could follow up with a situational question such as, so tell me a little bit about your F&I team. Or how many F&I managers do you have on staff? What type of products are you offering to the customers? All of these are good starting points. You could also ask, who's typically responsible for making decisions about the F&I products and processes here? That question from a situational standpoint helps you better understand the dealer's operations and identify that you've got the right person to speak with in the future. Or if somebody else needs to be included, you'll be aware of that. Some additional situational questions might include things like, what's your typical process for onboarding and training a new F&I manager? Or, other than the manufacturer, what companies are you partnered with for your F&I product in development?
That all makes sense. And then once you have the facts, you can move on to problem awareness questions. Can you share some examples of effective questions to draw these out?
Yep. So again, situational phase, now we move into the next step, which is problem awareness. Here, you want to become aware of problems that may exist for the dealer, but more importantly, you want to give them an opportunity to share those with you. In this step, you're going to ask questions that encourage the prospect to tell you about situations in the store that they may not be thrilled with. This is where you want to be conversational, just transitioning into a natural extension from that initial greeting. So instead of asking the prospect, do you have a problem? You could say something like, so when you look at your F&I department's performance, what are some of the things that you're not thrilled with? Another option would be, have you noticed any particular products where the penetration rates are dropping or you think they could be higher? Another one could be, what kind of impact does a new F&I manager who isn't quite up to speed yet have on overall dealership profitability? It's important to note that the goal here is to get the prospect to acknowledge their challenges out loud. And that's the key. Some additional problem awareness questions might include things like, have you noticed any F&I products that are lower? And if so, what do you think might be contributing to that? The answer to that question can give you some insight as to problems and how to address them. How much of a concern is it when a customer declines F&I products, especially on a finance deal? And then my favorite, what's the biggest headache or frustration that comes with managing the F&I department?
And from there, we can move on to solution awareness questions. This is where you explore their ideas for a solution. It's about getting them to think about how they would solve their problems themselves, right?
Again, you're spot on. So remember, it's situational awareness, then it's problem awareness. Now we're talking about solution awareness. And you're not offering solutions at this phase, but think about it. With the right questioning, the prospect is going to acknowledge that a problem exists in their dealership. Now, you want them to get to think about things that they've done or not done in the past, or what are they going to do to address that particular issue. So again, in the solution awareness phase, a great question might be, given those challenges that you just mentioned, what are some of the things that you've considered to help improve the F&I performance? Again, problem awareness, solution awareness. What have you tried? You could also say something like, if you had a magic wand and could solve one F&I problem, what would it be and why? That's a great question because it's going to identify a particular pain point in the store and also give you an idea of where the priorities lie. Additional solution awareness questions might be things like, what's the biggest roadblock you've had in the past to implementing those solutions? Or, in your opinion, how would a more robust F&I product offering or enhanced training specifically help you with the problem that the prospect just raised?
And after that, the roadmap takes us to consequence questions. This is where we highlight the impact of not solving the problem. It seems like this would really drive home that urgency.
Yes, and it is all about urgency. So again, situation awareness, problem awareness, solution awareness. Now in the consequence phase, here you're going to highlight the pain of inaction on the part of the prospect. In this step of the process, you want that prospect to monetize or give size and scope to the cost of the problem. It may be in dollars, it may be in turnover, it could be in CSI, for example. You want to make the pain of doing nothing feel more prominent than the comfort of the status quo. In this particular step, some of the questions might be, all right, so based on what you shared with me, how much revenue or profit do you think you're leaving on the table each month by not addressing that problem? Think about that. The prospect told you about a problem. Now you're going to force them to put a number on that. A similar question might be something like, so what's the impact of your bottom line if that F&I penetration remains where it is over the next 3 or 6 months? A question like that connects their problem to a quantifiable business impact. Some additional consequence questions may include things like, if your F&I team isn't trained to comfortably overcome objections, what does that mean to your potential revenue on a monthly basis? Again, putting size and scope to that problem. Or has there ever been a situation where an F&I performance issue directly affected the dealership's ability to achieve the financial goals or be eligible for incentive money? And then one last one, looking a year down the road, if these challenges aren't addressed, what do you imagine the implications could be for you and the dealership's competitiveness and profitability?
And then finally, in this last long engagement stage, we have the qualifying questions. This is where you determine urgency and fit. So what are some of the best questions to use here?
All right, I'm glad that you phrased that question that way, the long engagement phase. I just want to remind everybody that's listening that while it may seem like that's long, that particular step is long and drawn out, it's really not. Because in reality, you're only going to be asking 1 or 2 questions for each step and then allowing the prospect to give you those answers. So while it may seem long, in reality, it's a pretty brief but powerful conversation. The qualifying questions are a great way to confirm if the prospects for an appointment are real at this point or just you haven't done a good enough job to get that prospect's attention. A powerful question is, for example, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being absolutely must improve now, where would you say optimizing your F&I performance falls for you in the dealership right now? Again, we're trying to qualify the amount of interest to get to the next step. What would need to happen in order for you to even consider talking to an outside partner? These give you the keys to the decision-making process. Some additional questions you might want to consider. Is this something that you're looking to address in the near future, or are you generally content with the current level of performance? Or, just so I'm clear, if we could show you a clear path to significantly increasing your profitability and CSI, is that something you'd want to take a closer look at? Again, these are kind of like trial closes. And then what's the biggest reason for not making any of the changes that you're looking for in the last 12 months?
That's incredibly helpful, Peter. So once you've successfully navigated the engagement stage, you're ready to transition to the appointment. How would we do that smoothly?
Well, the transition stage is all about bridging from the pain to the value of the meeting. as you went through the problems phase, the solutions phase, the consequences phase, you've brought those issues to the prospect's mind. But more importantly, they're the ones that vocalized it. Now, after you've done all that good work, it's about transitioning into the value of that meeting. So the best suggestion is start by summarizing the pain points that they just shared with you. This is going to show that you are paying attention and listening. You could say something like, based on what you just shared, it sounds like increasing that VSC penetration and improving CSI are important. Plus, ensuring the team has the right training and tools. Does that sound about right? And once they agree, then you'll be able to ask for the meeting directly. Another twist on that could be something like, now that I have a clearer picture of what you're looking to achieve, would it make sense for us to schedule a brief in-person meeting where I could show you exactly how we've helped other dealers solve the same issues? And again, don't be afraid of those types of questions, because we do have strategies to handle the pushbacks. Some additional approaches could be something like, would you be open to me stopping by next week for about 20 minutes to gather some additional information and clearly identify some specific opportunities for the F&I department? Or, given everything that we've talked about, are you ready to explore a custom F&I strategy, what that might look like for your dealership? And that's going to start with a deeper conversation.
So then the next phase leads us to presentation, but you're not presenting your product, are you? You're presenting the value of the meeting itself?
Absolutely. The biggest mistake that prospectors make on those initial prospecting calls is to try to sell themselves, their products, or their processes. And that's not what it's all about. Each step in this process is designed to get you to the next step. So the presentation phase, it's not about selling the final solution. The goal of the step is to get to the next step, and the next step is getting commitment to the meeting. So in this stage, you might say something like, so just so you know, in our meeting, we can take a closer look at the current numbers and identify exactly where the biggest opportunities for growth are. How does having that kind of data-driven insight sound? Let the prospect answer. Another good one is, the goal of our meeting won't be for me to try to sell you anything, but simply to help you identify areas where you might be leaving money on the table. Does the idea of an objective, no-pressure analysis of your F&I department sound like a worthwhile use of your time? A question like that keeps it low pressure and high value. Some additional presentation questions could sound like this. During our time together, I'll show you a few products that are really resonating with customers right now, which could directly address some of those low pen rates that you mentioned. Is that something that would be valuable for you? Again, moving them towards that meeting. Or I'll be able to share proven methodologies that help F&I managers sell more effectively without making them feel like they're being too pushy. How important is it for you to have happier customers and a more productive F&I team? And finally, think about it as a brief consultation where you'll walk away with new ideas regardless of whether or not we end up working together. Is that an appealing proposition?
Thanks, Peter. So moving on, next we have the commitment stage, where you help them commit to the appointment itself. How do you solidify their buy-in?
The key here is this is where you need to get them to persuade themselves. You can't coerce somebody into meeting with you, but you want to position the meeting as a good idea for the prospect. You could say something like, okay, so based on everything we've discussed, do you feel like that brief meeting would be a valuable next step for you? And then follow up with, okay, great. Why do you feel that way? What specifically resonates with you about scheduling a deeper conversation? This is going to make them articulate the value for themselves, which is much more powerful than you telling them why it's going to be better for them to meet with you. Some additional commitment approaches might include things like, so what's your gut feeling now about putting something on the calendar? Or what would be the logical next step to get this meeting scheduled? Say this confidently and straightforward. Or if we can find some time that works next week, is there any reason that you can think of that would cause you to cancel or not make that meeting?
And then, of course, sometimes they will have objections, which is why phase 6 is overcoming objections. What's the key here?
The key here is I'm not naive enough to think that the dealers or the prospects are simply going to lay down when you hit them with this process. But when they do object, the key is to loop back to their pain. In the training that we provide, we spend a lot of time discussing how to be better prepared for and to respond to the inevitable objections that you're going to get from the prospects. So as I mentioned earlier, since you're an interruption and they already have an incumbent provider or two, and they get solicited nonstop. So according to an expert in the field, a gentleman by the name of Jeb Blunt, the first step in addressing the initial resistance is to determine if the resistance is simply a reflexive response, which is something that the prospect says without any thought, and they say it because it's worked to shut down salespeople in the past. You've all heard these. The reflexive responses are things like, I'm not interested, or I'm happy with my current provider. So that's one category of these no's. Another category is a brush off. So we have the reflex responses, and then we have the brush offs. This resistance is used to just kind of put you off. It's essentially the slow no. Those slow no's can sound like, this isn't a good time to talk. This isn't a good day, a good week, a good year. Call me back next Thursday. I need to talk to my partner. She's on vacation. These are brush offs, and it might be difficult to believe, but in many cases, this is the prospect not wanting to hurt your feelings and not just tell you no flat out. So being prepared to address these brush offs will be helpful. So you got the reflexive responses, then you got the brush offs. And then the last category are the true objections. And interestingly, according to all the research, the true objections make up the smallest percentage of all the objections that you're going to get. A true objection could be, you know what, we just signed a writing agreement tied to an advance and we can't do anything for 36 months. So again, you have the reflex responses, you have the brush offs, and then you have the actual responses. So if the prospect says something like, I'm happy with my current provider, you can respond with something like, I hear you and I can appreciate that. How much of a problem would it be if you continue to potentially miss out on, that $200 or $300 of PVR that you identified previously? Another approach could be, what's truly behind the hesitation to schedule the meeting? If you don't mind me asking, this often gets to the real issue. So additional objection approaches could be something like, if we could find a way to make this work, and I was in and out in 20 minutes, would you be still interested in solving that problem? So again, they're going to try to push you off. So you can respond with, hey, let's say for a moment that your concern about switching providers, that wasn't an issue. How much of a priority would it be for you to maximize the revenue stream in the dealership? Again, going back to the pain points. Another one is, it sounds like you're weighing again the comfort of the status quo against the potential for future growth. Is that a fair assessment?
So finally, we get to the logistics and next steps. How do we make sure that the appointment is confirmed and solid at this point?
Fair question. Since we've got a little bit of extra time, I just want to go into one more thing in addressing the objections. Something that is important to remember is the way that we're all hardwired. When the customer tries to shut you down cold, in many cases, it triggers a fight or flight response in the person doing the prospecting. And when that happens, the blood is diverted away from your brain, and you're not really able to think clearly. So one of the techniques that we talk about is when you get hit with those objections, the first thing you need to do is be prepared for it. But more importantly, just have some way of anchoring yourself just to get yourself steady on your feet. It's kind of like a boxing match. The minute you get hit in the face, you get stunned. And the first thing boxers do is they're going to cover up and back away. And that's the anchoring phase. And we get into much more detail on those techniques, but I just wanted to throw that out there. So going back to your last step here, the logistics in the next step, you just want to be clear and confident. Again, you went through the problem awareness, the solution awareness, the consequences phase. Then you're transitioning, you're testing for commitment. Now it's about, okay, you got the meeting. So you want to be clear and confident. And you might want to say something like, all right, so what we'll do next is we'll get a meeting on the calendar for the both of us. I'm going to be back in the area on the 19th. How about we set it up for 45 minutes on the 19th back here in your office? I'm specifically suggesting that you stay away from the tried and true. Okay, so what works better for you next Tuesday or Thursday? The research suggests that you're not going to trap the prospect into going, oh my gosh, I have to pick one of those. So be very clear, very, very precise. Where, when, and how long. You should also ask, is there anybody else that from the management team that you'd like to include in the meeting? Again, you probably have an idea if you did the questioning properly. If somebody else was going to be involved, make sure that person has the opportunity to be in there, because that takes a future objection off the table. Not to mention to make sure all the key players are going to be there. Some additional logistical approaches. You might want to say something like, all right, I'm going to send you a quick email with my contact information. I'm going to provide a brief agenda of the meeting so we're both on the same page and you know what to expect. Does that sound good? Just to confirm, you're comfortable moving forward and setting a time to talk more next week. Or, and I'll leave you with this last one, I'm looking forward to our conversation. I'm sure that I'll be able to identify at least one or two actionable opportunities in your store. And at the very least, you'll be able to ask better questions and hold better meetings. Is there anything else you need from me before we get that on the calendar?
Thanks, Peter. So based on all those steps you just covered, here's a quick wrap-up of tips to remember that can aid you when talking to those dealers. First, be direct and respectful of their time. Position yourself as a problem solver from the start. Engage to gather facts, uncover pain points, explore solutions, and highlight the cost of inaction. Listen actively and show understanding. Encourage self-persuasion to reinforce value. Prepare for those objections, and confirm and solidify meeting logistics. Peter, is there anything else you'd like to add before we move into the question portion of our webinar today?
No, I think that's the tip. And the only thing, again, is just a reminder that you're going to use one question in each phase to get that conversation started, and then just get comfortable with it and go from there.
Great. So then let's switch gears to some Q&A. If you didn't type in your question during the webinar, you have some time now, which you can type into the Ask a Question box at the very bottom of your screen. We'll try to answer them all, but if we don't get to yours, Allstate will reach out directly with a response. So let's jump right into it. First question, Peter. How do you effectively engage with a prospect without sounding scripted?
Practice, practice, practice. If you watch movies or television shows and you're really moved by a performance, remember, those just started as words on a page. So it's really being able to know what to expect. So plan what your call is going to be like. The thing I like about what we shared today is it gives you a roadmap. So practice it, be prepared, and keep on practicing.
Great. Next question. Are there other tactics to initially building a connection, perhaps finding common ground on a personal level?
Yes. Research is always a good place to start, and a great place to do easy research is to go to the dealership's website and then look at the About Us portion of the website. There you get to see what interests they have. You can get some names off of there. And also maybe go in and do a little bit of recon, where you go into the stores before you try to make contact with the decision maker and just engage people in the store on different conversations. So that way, when you're going into that connection phase, you can actually use details. For example, I understand that you're a big supporter of the Boys and Girls Clubs in the area, and I think that's fantastic. You can use that as an opening in that connection phase.
So our next viewer asks, can you share a time when a prospect convinced themselves to take action?
Actually, when you do the process properly, it happens more often than not. What happens is when you lead the prospect into viewing the numbers from a different lens, it triggers curiosity. Been cases where we've been talking to dealer prospects and they're very, very reluctant. I'm happy with who I'm doing business with, and we get past that. And when you just ask the question, all right, so I appreciate all that, but when you put a number on it, so in other words, all right, so based on that little discrepancy, how much money are you leaving on the table every year? Once the prospect says the number, whatever it is, 20,000, 50,000, 200,000, you can actually see a little light bulb go off in their brain because they just looked at it from a different perspective. We talk a lot about the difference between perception and perspective, and it's very difficult to change somebody's perception. So what we're talking about here is the perception of, I don't need you because I'm doing well with who I'm doing business with. That's a perception. And if you try to get somebody to change that perception, you're asking them to change their mind. But when you use these steps, what you're encouraging them to do is change their perspective or how they're viewing it. So if you get them to view it not as I'm happy with who I'm doing business with, I'm not looking forward to this big disruption. Rather, you have them look at it from the perspective of, oh, I like these people, but it's costing me hundreds of thousands of dollars. Maybe it's worthwhile to consider something else. That's why letting them convince themselves with the right questioning is so much more powerful.
Thanks, Peter. Next question. What's your approach when a prospect raises an objection you weren't expecting?
There really shouldn't be a situation where you're going to get an objection that you weren't expecting. I mentioned earlier, there's this concept of anchor and disrupt and ask. There's another technique that I've been training for 25 years called the ledge. And with the ledge, it's very simple. No matter what they say, just use that as the reason to have the meeting. So if they say, you know what, I never make decisions on Tuesdays. You go, hey, I can certainly appreciate that. As a matter of fact, my biggest dealer today told me the same thing the first time I met with him. And now he's been doing business with us for almost 14 years and couldn't be happier. It's an easy technique. Just use what they give you as the objection as the reason to continue and have the meeting.
Great. Our next viewer asks, how do you keep the conversation flowing while still gathering critical information?
Two things come to mind. The first one is to be prepared. So if you know the path that you're going to follow and you truly know it, so you understand that it's going to go in, you're going to form the connection, then it's going to be problem awareness, solution awareness, consequence. If you don't have to think about that, and you already have the questions you're going to ask loaded up because you know what you're going to do, when you pair that with good active listening skills, that's where the magic is going to happen and that conversation is going to flow. Active listening could be nodding your head, showing them that you're listening, asking some follow-up questions. Hey, that was interesting. Could you tell me a little bit more about that particular situation? The two things, being prepared and active listening, that'll make that flow very easily.
Thanks, Peter. So our next question asks, how would you follow up without feeling too pushy?
That's a great question. And that kind of opens up a different conversation, but I think an important one. Again, everything that we talk about is neuroscience based, and just the term follow-up tends to be a trigger for resistance in the prospect's minds. So how do you follow up without feeling too pushy? I'll give you a quick two-step process. The first one is when you do call back, just reference the previous contact. So, hey, Kate, I know that we spoke about 3 weeks ago about a specific problem. That's the first step. And then the second one is to ask a direct problem-focused question. So you would follow up with, so have you guys decided to do anything about that issue, or are you just going to accept that lower level of performance? Again, you're asking questions to make that prospect internalize it. The opposite of that is what a lot of people do and say, hey, I'm just calling to follow up on our meeting to see if you're interested in doing it again. Again, the term follow up or just stay in contact or just checking in, all of those things diminish your stature and put you in an advantageous position that's really just not necessary.
That was helpful. Thanks, Peter. So this next viewer asks, once you secure a meeting, what are some tips to prepare for the next step?
Again, the next step, that initial meeting, it's all about knowing what you're going in to accomplish and what you're not going in to accomplish. That next meeting might be some additional fact gathering. There are there are a lot of specific training items around preparing for that visit, but whatever your approach is, reference back to what was brought up in that initial contact, whatever the pain points were. Again, problem awareness, solution awareness, and then consequences, and then go and use that as the opening. Hey, I'm glad we got the opportunity to get together. So now let's focus in on the area that you said was important, and then just know where you're going to go from there. And more importantly, or most importantly, what is the next step in your process? So the prospecting was to get to the first meeting. The first meeting is probably going to be to get the okay to get additional information so you can formulate what your solution or action plan is going to be, and then get that next meeting scheduled. So again, it's just having a plan, following that plan, and being prepared to execute that plan.
Thanks, Peter. Before we jump into our final two questions, this is just a last chance announcement to all our viewers. If you did have a question but haven't asked it yet, this would be the time. Okay. Could you repeat the status quo question, please?
The status quo question. If that's the situational question, the situational questions, those questions could be something like, so tell me a little bit about the makeup of your F&I department. Another one could be, have they gone to any formal training? How many people are in the department? It's all identifying what the current situation is in that store as it relates to, and this is important, that's a good question, as it relates to whatever your value proposition is. So we always focus on F&I because that's the world that we live in. But if your expertise might be to help the sales department in closing more sales, or help the service department in maximizing dollars per RO, it's really important to just get that conversation started on the topic that you plan to address during that prospecting call. I hope I understood the question correctly.
Thanks, Peter. And on to our final question. What are the most common pain points out there that a dealer is willing to admit?
Depends on the dealer and really the questioning. If you take the pressure off and say, look, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I am genuinely curious. Curiosity is a tremendous tool if you use it correctly. And just take the threat or fear away of answering, because every F&I department has problems. Every dealer has problems. Quite frankly, every provider, everybody has problems. So what are the more common ones? It's PVR, it's product penetrations, it might be CSI, it may be a perception that the F&I managers spend too much time with the customers. It may be a perception that they don't spend enough time. An important thing to keep in mind, and if this is the last question, I'll leave you with this thought. Nothing is either good or bad except by comparison. And what I mean by that is a dealer may think that they're doing a great job until they find out that they're not. And you can't just come straight out and tell them they're not doing a good job. You can't tell them that they made a bad decision by partnering with who they decided to partner with. But you can ask them questions that can lead them to those same conclusions. And the power of them leading themselves to those conclusions is so much more than you trying to convince them that they're in a bad position. I'm going to quote a friend of mine from this business. I'll call him Jiu-Jitsu Johnny. And he told me that a person convinced against their will usually remains unconvinced still. Think about that. You can get somebody to change their mind on the moment, but it's not going to last. But if you can position it where they change their mind, the stickiness goes up dramatically.
Well, thanks, Peter, for those final thoughts. And this has been an incredibly insightful session. Your step-by-step approach gives agents a clear, confident path to follow. So thank you so much again for sharing today.
My pleasure.
And thank you to everyone who joined us today. We will be sending out the recording of this webinar to all attendees, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Dealer Group webinar. Have a wonderful day.